cambiar vidas,
change lives,
change organizations,
change
दुनिया में
organizations,
बदलाव.
Change the world.
My name is Carey Wang from the Institute for Information Industries. I have a question regarding the the electronic vehicle. For the first speaker, have you looked into the spatial vehicle uses against the commercial passenger cars? Because to me, the spatial vehicle seems to be easier to make popular, and also they tend to not to be used for long distance.
I'm sorry, when you say specialty vehicles, you mean buses or?
Could be any spatial vehicle like tractors, or short distance bus, or the industrial vehicles, and anything that's not passenger car.
Yeah, so I don't quite know about the agriculture business. My sort of gut feel is it's probably a much smaller market in terms of volume, but don't know. I think what we both talked about was a big opportunity in buses, in transportation. There's been a lot of deployment in China. There's a company in California by the name of Proterra. Actually, it's, the executive I know lives in Proterra. They're actually on the East Coast in North Carolina or South Carolina, that has 6 or 10 or 12, I don't remember the exact number of buses that they're deploying, that have some sort of battery swapping technology that was just also discussed. But I mean, buses are great because it's, you bring them back to a central location. They have a standard route that's predictable. They usually don't drive that long. So you don't need a long range. So it's one of the I think the more suitable applications for electric vehicles. And high utilization, right? So I don't know if you have any comments on other.
Well, again, I think we just have to get our priorities straight, and the fleet approach makes so much more sense initially. It's easier on the grid. The grid problem is not a simple problem. When you have, and take California, not only do you have these distributed centers recharging, and recharging is very, very power intensive, especially if you're using fast recharging, extremely intense. So if you're trying to do that on a widely distributed basis, you've got a big, big problem to solve. And then in California especially, but other areas, we have all these distributed sources, whether they're solar panels or anything else, that have to be fed into the grid. And that's tricky because you have to keep it, the harmonics in balance, right? And when you have thousands or tens of thousands or millions of sources, all with inverters that are based on chip technology and software, trying to regulate that, the utilities have a real headache. So let's start with these centralized fleets that make economic sense, that are much easier to deploy, and then we will learn much more. We sort of have it, I think, in reverse in terms of our priorities here. And China's getting it right because they're going for fleets initially.
I mean, cars as well as buses and others.
Yeah. Any centralized motor pool fleet or taxi cab fleet or whatever, those make the easiest, best sense, and they have tremendous impact on lowering emissions immediately.
Sean Wang from ITRI. With this government financial situation around the world, could you comment on how this government incentive on all this green technology could balance out in the future, especially maybe in China, in the US, and Europe?
So I don't know if this is going to specifically answer your question, but government's incentives are needed to help these technologies get to scale, so that they can become affordable and ultimately aren't required. When you look at what's happened in solar, there's a lot of bad press around feed-in tariffs for solar being reduced in Germany, and I actually think that they're meeting their expectation, and that's a good thing. I mean, they're being reduced because prices have come down and demand is high, and people are making too much money. They're not doing it because they want to reduce carbon or be better about the environment. There's a financial calculation with feed-in tariffs that that incentivize people to do it. So they're needed. They need the right. They need the right control and management. Spain is a good example of a company that didn't really think through their feed-in tariff, and they used too high of a rate, and it was oversubscribed, and they had to shut it down because they went bankrupt. They just didn't plan it out. So I guess they need to be well thought out. They need to be planned. I think they may raise some costs for all users in the short term, but in the long run, they're going to help the deployment of these technologies, and we're going to all be better off from a energy management, energy control, carbon reduction standpoint. So,
that's a very good question, and one with I think we need some more thoughtful approaches. As Brian suggested, the feed-in tariffs did a great job on a short-term basis, but then cut off. And so all these factories had built for the feed-in tariffs, and then they're not there. And I have come to believe, we saw a presentation by Applied Materials, which knows something about the solar world. And they made a very interesting presentation about the effective cost per kilowatt hour of the technologies. Doesn't matter, thin film or polysilicon or whatever it may be. And the real driver, because as Brian mentioned earlier, only 1/3 of the cost is the technology. 2/3 is the installation and the land and so on if you're building utility scale stuff. Why not think about a universal worldwide platform where we could offer 1 or 2% long-term interest rates instead of all sorts of feed-in tariffs different from one country, because that's how you really reduce it. Let's let the best technology win. Let's be agnostic, and we aren't picking Solyndra or we aren't picking someone else. We're offering a low-cost financing mechanism and let the best technologies win. I don't know if that's doable in terms of financing worldwide, but we have historically low interest rates, essentially zero rates in most of the modernized world. This would be a terrific time. We're in the midst now of a trade war with China on solar. And I will give you a personal point of view about that, not an institutional one. I think it's wacko. I had a speech in the Great Hall in December, and my friends from Chinese leadership started poking, and I couldn't I couldn't say no. I hate that policy, and my job was to somehow defend it without being intellectually dishonest. But we've turned this into a trade war. So a German company that owns a factory in America has started a trade war between China and the United States on solar. Taiwan, by the way, is at least the short-term winner, because the way around, everybody's clever, everybody figures these things out. Chinese manufacturers like Suntech now are sending their modules to Taiwan, where they're fitted with Taiwanese chips instead of Chinese chips. Therefore, they've gotten around the import tariffs. So people always work around it. Why have this Band-Aid and this fix and this fix? Why not have a low cost of capital and let the best technologies win, but give people something they can depend on? Charlie Gay of Applied, who's probably the smartest guy I've ever met in solar, will tell you the real key to solar is scale. And you can't build scale for a cycle, a market cycle that goes like this with incentives. You need to know where you're going and what the market's going to be.
I mean, that's why First Solar is getting out of all these markets that have incentives that are driven by incentives, and they want to go to markets that need power, and it's actually independent of subsidies, the 2 billion people or whatever you talked about. It's a pure math calculation to figure out, this is the ROI on that. Let's go build capabilities to deploy solutions there. So,
By the way, just a brief political pitch here. And I think no place in the world is better able to think about this than Silicon Valley. Our trade system in the U.S. is prescribed by a quasi-judicial procedure. So the Department of Commerce is not even allowed to interpret certain facts. I mean, the Chinese are looking at us and they're saying, you're criticizing us for subsidizing, and you just gave a subsidy to Suntech to build a plant in Arizona? I mean, we look duplicitous. Right. And that's what really frightens me. We have lived, even with Taiwan arms sale, currency exchange, Google, all the other crises we've lived through in the last 2 or 3 years with China have not broken the bubble of cooperation on clean energy. There is such common vested interest and an urgency there. But now this tariff thing is a crack in the glass. It's causing the Chinese to say, are the Americans really serious about this, or are they speaking out of both sides of their mouth?
Hi, this is Mei Chi Hu, visiting SPRIE and also from Taiwan. Actually, I have 2 questions. The first one is for Brian. How the lacking of stronger manufacturing capability, or at least the complete value chain, manufacturing value chain, impact the deployment of a smart city, at least in the U.S.? Is there any impact or any influence that would be reduce, or because as you mentioned that one of the critical point is the systematic engineering approach. Yep. And the second question I think I would like to pose to Dennis, can you talk about something about the the current development of the shale gas in China, since it has the largest capacity in the world? Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I think I missed the first part of your question. So you asked what was the impact of manufacturing to? Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I would say it's very, for smart cities where you've got a lot of new adoption of new technologies, it's very critical to understand not only the objectives of what you're trying to achieve in that city, but also what the customer expectations are. And it's almost like that city of Austin, the Pecan Street example that I talked about. You've got to really understand within a smart city what features, what pricing, what capabilities are needed. And the manufacturings, or the vertically integrated manufacturers that are supporting those, it's very critical that they've got some mechanism for being tightly linked to what's going on in, say, a smart city, because there's this constant improvement in technology that needs to be sort of vetted out with the smart city. I guess it's a lot more of a evolving ecosystem where you've got to constantly kind of match technology and customer needs. So there's got to be the right information flows and processes that these manufacturers need to stay coordinated with what's happening in the smart city environment.
I think you wanted an example, right? Remind me the specific.
The fracking in China.
Oh, the fracking. Well, don't know. So in Sichuan province in southwest China, they believe they've discovered reserves which could even exceed what the United States has. And you know how that's changed the picture. We've gone from 20% natural gas for generation in the US to 30% in the last year. The speed of change is enormous, and the impact is enormous. So China has already done a deal with Shell and is negotiating with several others. They're very high on it. They think there's potential. It may be harder to recover than the US. But if true, and if true in an environmentally appropriate way, and I still think more work needs to be done on that, it could change everything. Because China has to use coal as a feedstock for petrochemicals. We all think of fuel like coal or natural gas or oil just as a fuel. Well, actually, it's a chemical ingredient for a lot of its use. Or coal is used to make steel, cement, and so on. It has a lot of other uses. So if you could get China, if we don't have leakage, if you could get China off coal and use natural gas for those industrial chemicals, that alone would be a big step forward. So we're still on the don't know, but could be exciting. And then I'll leave it to your own imagination to think about what that does for foreign policy around the world and gathering needed resources and making deals. It really has the potential to change everything. And I hope they find lots of clean natural gas they can get in a safe and environmentally appropriate way.
On natural gas, it is, say, no accident that this shale gas development occurred in the United States. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that the land where this development is taking place is privately owned. It's not state-owned in the underground deposits. Private property, that's the first point. Second, the industry that did it was a small-scale operators, competitive. No state-owned companies involved because we don't have them. So that combination, it's all private, both on the drilling side, the exploration drilling side, and on the property side. So that's why it happened here. Now, once it's developed and so on, people see, oh, there's the model, and we must have some, we have some, we'll get there, and so on. But that's really why it began and flourished here.
Wrapping up this session, I think that over the last 1.5 days that we have heard about many things in terms of different emerging technologies related to smart and green cities. I remember last year at this time in the forum, nobody has mentioned anything about shale gas. and over the last 2 days, how many times that we have come upon this new technology. So I think that at the end of the day, it's going to take time for new technology, new competitive technology to come around. We will always question if government has enough incentives to deploy some of these smart and green technologies. But I wish that we have more people like Dennis, and maybe many of us could become Dennis, try to promote time is the enemy, and let's go ahead and do it. And more people with a mindset change. Probably we don't have to wait for the latest technology. We don't have to rely on government subsidies. And with that, let's give a big thank to our two speakers.
Cambiar vidas, change organizations,
Change
दुनिया में बदलाव,
Change the world.